All right, let's dive into the world of digital transformation. This deep dive is especially for those of you leading the charge out there. At PE and VC firms, steering companies as CXOs, or anyone really who's wrestling with digital transformation, we're going straight to the source today. The buzz of Italian Agile Day 2024, IAD24 for those in the know.
IAD is always a hotbed of new ideas in the Agile world, and this year was no exception. We're lucky to have a recap from Michele Brissoni, a technical lead and all-around Agile expert who was at the event.
Michele handpicked some talks that really stood out to him, and now we get to break them down together. First up is Michele's own presentation, Stop Transforming, Start Evolving.
Oh, interesting.
14 years of research went into this, so you know, be good.
14 years, wow. What did he learn?
Well, he's making a pretty bold statement. He says we need to ditch the digital transformation mindset and think about it more like a natural evolution. Think people and technology evolving together like a finely tuned ecosystem. He calls it socio-technical evolution. It's about creating a work environment where teams can adapt and thrive organically.
That is refreshing, pushing back against the idea of forcing frameworks onto organizations. So what are the key elements he highlights for creating this adaptable environment?
Two big ones, psychological safety and autonomy. He says teams need to feel safe, to take risks, make mistakes, and speak up without fear of judgment. And they need the freedom to make decisions and really own their work. It's not just a feel-good thing either. He's got a data-driven framework called the Unicorns Ecosystem that uses something called behavioral markers to actually measure how well an organization is doing in these areas.
Data-driven. It's not about gut feelings. Tell me more about these behavioral markers. What are they and how are they measured?
So think about how teams communicate. Do they openly share information, or are they siloed? Do they celebrate successes and learn from failures? Or is there a culture of blame? He even looks at how decisions are made, top-down or collaboratively. These are the types of behaviors he's measuring to get a snapshot of an organization's agility.
That's fascinating. Taking the pulse, so to speak, of the organization's health. And for our listeners, especially those struggling with traditional transformation methods, this could be really insightful. Instead of just implementing the latest Agile framework, they can focus on cultivating the right behaviors.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture where agility just flourishes naturally, not about checking boxes. Now, another talk that Michele highlighted was Andrea Provaglio's deep dive into the Agile Manifesto itself, aptly titled Unpacking the Manifesto. Andrea makes the case that the original message might have gotten a little, lost in translation over the years.
That makes sense. It happens with any movement that gains momentum. Things get simplified, commercialized. Sometimes the core message gets diluted. What does he think has been misinterpreted?
Well, he doesn't hold back. He went straight to the source, interviewed some of the original signers of the Agile Manifesto. One key takeaway: a reminder that agility is about people and interactions, not just processes and tools. Somewhere along the line, we started focusing more on certifications and frameworks than on fostering the right behaviors.
It's easy to fall into that trap. We crave structure and certainty, but true agility requires flexibility and adaptability. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we go beyond the surface and truly embody the values of the Agile Manifesto?
That's where things get really interesting. And it ties back to the idea of behavioral engineering that Michele was talking about, shifting our focus from processes to people. This next talk really brings that to life.
I'm all ears.
Get this. Anna Di Girolamo, in her talk, Agile Bread, uses a local bakery to illustrate how shared values can drive transformation.
Agile Bread. That's a new one. Tell me more.
It's brilliant. This bakery, Mercato del Pane, the bread marketplace in Pescara, Italy, they don't even use a formal Agile framework. They just behave in an Agile way because of their shared values. A passion for quality, a focus on partnerships, and a commitment to transparency.
So their agility is baked into their culture. I love it. But how does that translate into actual results?
Oh, they achieved impressive results. Focusing on building relationships with local farmers to source the best ingredients, they collaborated openly with other bakers. And get this, they even shared their recipes. This led to a whole network of like-minded bakeries. They call themselves Fratelli del Pane, the Bread Brothers, all committed to these same values.
Wait, they share their recipes? That's remarkable. It seems counterintuitive. But it speaks to a deep level of trust and a belief in the power of collective growth.
Exactly. It's about more than just speed and efficiency. It's about building a strong foundation of trust and shared purpose. And that resonates deeply with me, especially in the context of digital transformation.
Yeah. It really makes you think, how many organizations are so focused on finding the perfect framework that they overlook the power of human connection and shared values.
A question worth pondering for sure. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, let's turn our attention to our final talk from IAD24, one that tackles a challenge a lot of organizations face: technical debt. Roberto Bettazzoni, in his talk, Transforming Technical Debt into Competitive Advantage, uses a brilliant analogy to shed light on this often misunderstood topic.
This is something I know our listeners are dealing with. Technical debt can be a silent killer.
He compares technical debt to, wait for it, financial debt. Genius.
Right.
He argues that if leaders truly understood the cost of technical debt, they would be much more proactive about addressing it.
That's such a powerful way to frame it. It takes something abstract and technical and puts it into a language that everyone understands, especially those making financial decisions. What were some of his key insights?
Well, he argues that technical debt, just like financial debt, accrues interest. If you don't address it early on, it can snowball into a massive liability, hindering innovation and agility. He challenged leaders to think of technical debt not just as a tech problem, but as a financial risk that could impact the bottom line. That's a message that really resonates, especially with our listeners in the BEVC world and those leading large-scale transformations.
Absolutely. So what can our listeners do to tackle this debt? Did he offer any practical advice?
He did. In fact, he offered some really actionable strategies for measuring and communicating the cost of technical debt in a way that makes sense to business leaders. He emphasized using data to demonstrate the impact of technical debt on key performance indicators.
Makes sense.
Exactly. And he also recommended developing a debt repayment plan, just like you would with financial debt. You need a plan to pay down your technical debt over time. This could involve setting aside dedicated time for refactoring code, implementing automated testing, or even adopting new tools and technologies that help reduce technical debt.
That makes a lot of sense. This is where prioritization comes in, right? You can't tackle everything at once.
Absolutely. That's where his technical debt portfolio concept comes in. He recommends categorizing different types of technical debt based on their severity and potential impact, and then prioritize the most critical items and address those first.
So it's like triage for your code base.
Exactly. And he also emphasized the importance of communicating the cost of technical debt to non-technical stakeholders. This is where that financial debt analogy comes in handy again. It helps business leaders understand that ignoring technical debt is like ignoring a growing financial liability.
It puts it into terms they can relate to. Makes it clear that addressing technical debt is not just a technical issue, but a strategic business decision. I love how these talks are all coming together, weaving a narrative about the human side of digital transformation.
And speaking of weaving narratives, I think it's time to connect all these insights back to our listeners and their own unique contexts. What are some of the key takeaways that are resonating with you so far?
You know, I think the common thread running through all these talks is a focus on people, whether it's creating a culture of psychological safety, embracing the human-centric values of the Agile Manifesto, or building trust like those Bread Brothers. It all comes back to recognizing that people are at the heart of any successful transformation.
That's spot on. And in the next segment, we'll dig even deeper into Michele's recap, exploring some specific examples and takeaways that you can actually implement within your own organizations. So stay tuned.
I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty, see how these ideas can be put into practice.
Let's do it. Let's go back to Michele's Unicorns Ecosystem Framework, the one that helps companies actually measure their agility. Remember those behavioral markers?
Oh, yeah.
He gets into the specifics.
Good. That's what I was hoping for. Give me an example. How do you actually measure something like psychological safety?
So one way is to measure how often teams engage in what he calls healthy conflict. Do they feel comfortable challenging each other's ideas? Respectfully, of course. Or do they just avoid confrontation altogether? You can actually track this by observing team meetings, analyzing communication patterns, even doing surveys.
You can't just assume their psychological safety. You got to look for it, observe it in action.
Exactly. And if you notice that teams are shying away from healthy conflict, that could be a red flag. It could mean there's a lack of psychological safety. Then you can dig deeper, try to understand why, and figure out how to address it. Michele's point is that this data-driven approach, it's crucial for moving beyond gut feelings and making informed decisions about how to improve agility.
Like a diagnostic tool for your company's culture. Instead of guessing, you have actual data.
Right. And remember Andrea Provaglio's talk on the Agile Manifesto.
Yeah.
Michele highlighted one principle in particular that often gets misconstrued: working software over comprehensive documentation.
Oh, yeah, that one. It always seems to get twisted into, we don't need any documentation. which I'm sure wasn't the intention.
You're right, it wasn't. Michele reminds us that this principle was really meant to emphasize the importance of delivering value to the customer quickly and iteratively. Documentation is still important, but it shouldn't become a bottleneck. It shouldn't slow down the delivery of working software.
It makes me think of the lean startup movement. The minimum viable product. Get something functional out there, quickly get feedback, and iterate.
Yeah, it's about finding that sweet spot. You need enough documentation to guide development, ensure maintainability. But you don't want to get stuck in endless planning and documentation before you even have a product.
Right. It's not about chucking documentation altogether. It's about being strategic, focusing on what delivers the most value, which often means working software that users can actually interact with.
Speaking of delivering value, let's circle back to that Agile bread story. I'm sure our listeners are wondering how those bakers actually scaled their impact.
I'm still stuck on the fact that they shared their recipes. How did that not backfire?
That's the beauty of it. By sharing their knowledge, their expertise, they actually expanded their reach and influence. They weren't threatened by competition. They saw it as a way to raise the bar for everyone.
Like they were building a movement, not just a business. That's powerful, especially when you think about digital transformation. It's not about winning at all costs. It's about building a more collaborative, innovative ecosystem. So how did they scale their network?
It was all about building relationships, trust, with other bakeries that shared their values. They didn't try to impose some rigid structure or framework. They simply created a space where like-minded individuals could connect and learn from each other.
The opposite of that top-down command and control approach that so many organizations are stuck in.
Absolutely. And the results were amazing. They grew their network organically, and the Bread Brothers became known for their incredible quality and their commitment to community.
What a great example. Really highlights the power of shared values and that collaborative mindset.
All right, let's bring it home with Roberto Bettazzoni's insights on managing technical debt. He had some practical strategies that I think our listeners will find valuable.
Lay it on me.
So he emphasized using metrics to track the impact of technical debt on, key performance indicators. Like you could track how much time developers are spending fixing bugs or how often new features get delayed because of technical debt.
That makes sense. Quantify the problem, show the impact on the bottom line. It takes it beyond vague complaints.
Exactly. He also recommended developing a debt repayment plan. Just like with financial debt, you need a plan to pay down technical debt over time. This could involve dedicating time for refactoring code, implementing automated testing, adopting new tools that help reduce technical debt.
This is where prioritization comes in. You can't do everything at once.
Right, and that's where his technical debt portfolio concept comes in. He recommends categorizing different types of technical debt based on their severity, potential impact, and then tackle the most critical ones first.
Like triage for your code base.
Exactly. And he also stressed how important it is to communicate the cost of technical debt to non-technical stakeholders. This is where that financial debt analogy really shines. Helps business leaders grasp that ignoring technical debt is basically like ignoring a growing financial liability.
Puts it in terms they can understand, makes it clear that addressing technical debt is a strategic business decision, not just a tech issue. It's amazing how these talks all connect. They're telling a story about the human side of digital transformation.
And speaking of stories, I think it's time to connect all of this back to our listeners and their unique situations. What are some of the key takeaways that you think are most relevant for our audience? PE and VC professionals, CXOs, those leading digital transformations.
I think the biggest takeaway is that transformation isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It's not about blindly implementing the latest framework or methodology. It's about understanding the unique challenges and opportunities that your organization faces and finding the right approach for your context.
I couldn't agree more. And what I find so inspiring about these IAD24 talks is that they offer a fresh perspective. They remind us that it's the people, the behaviors, the values that really drive successful transformation. They challenge us to think beyond the processes and tools and focus on building a culture where agility flourishes naturally.
And that's a powerful message, especially for those who feel frustrated with the traditional methods. These talks offer hope, a reminder that there's another way, a way that puts people at the center and embraces the power of collaboration, trust, and shared purpose.
Beautifully said. As we head into our final segment, I want our listeners to consider how they can turn these inspiring ideas into action within their own organizations. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. As we wrap up our look at IAD24, I'm really feeling a sense of optimism. All these possibilities that these talks have sparked.
Yeah, definitely. It's so good to hear these new perspectives on digital transformation, ones that go beyond the usual jargon and get to the core of what really makes a difference.
And what really makes a difference is people. It's about cultivating those behaviors, creating a culture of trust and collaboration, and really empowering people to do their best work.
It's like a reminder that technology, at the end of the day, it's just a tool. The real transformation happens when you have the right people with the right mindset working together.
Michele really hit the nail on the head in his recap when he said, stop transforming and start evolving, embracing a more organic approach to change. One that allows for continuous learning and adaptation.
It's a challenge for all of us in leadership positions, whether we're at PEVC firms, CXOs, or any other role, to actually create those conditions, the ones where this kind of evolution can happen.
And he gave us some really practical tips, too. Remember those behavioral markers he talked about?
Yeah.
He encourages us to just observe, see how teams interact, how decisions are made, how mistakes are handled. All those things offer clues about the health of an organization's culture.
And he emphasized that data can actually be our friend here. By tracking these markers, we can move beyond just intuition and make informed choices about how to foster that agility.
He also highlighted the importance of, making sure our actions align with the Agile Manifesto. It's not about blindly following rules. It's about embracing the underlying principles. Collaboration, customer focus, continuous improvement.
He didn't shy away from the tough stuff either. His thoughts on technical debt were really eye-opening, framing it as a financial liability. He made it crystal clear that this isn't just some tech issue, it's a core business concern.
And he gave us some real strategies for tackling it too, from measuring the impact to creating repayment plans and prioritizing the most critical areas to address.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? How can they take these insights from IAD24 and actually apply them to their own organizations?
Well, I think the first thing is to shift our perspective. Stop thinking about digital transformation as this linear process with a finish line. Instead, think evolution, ongoing change.
And then we need to take stock of where we are. Look for those behavioral markers. Gather data. Have honest conversations about our strengths, but also about the areas where we need to improve.
And then, this is the most important part, take action. Start small. Experiment. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Learn from them and keep iterating.
This isn't about finding the perfect answer. It's a journey. There's no magic formula. But by embracing these principles, agility, collaboration, continuous learning, you can build an organization that doesn't just go through a digital transformation, but one that thrives in this ever-changing digital world.
Beautifully put. And for those of you who want to delve deeper into Michele's recap, we'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. It's full of great insights. Until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep evolving.